HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Secret History of Home Economics: How Trailblazing Women Harnessed the Power of Home and Changed the Way We Live. By Danielle Dreilinger. Read by Rachel Perry. Preface. Everything you know about home economics is wrong. When you imagine the founder of home economics, who do you see? Betty Crocker? Donna Reed? A white man with a handlebar mustache glaring at women to stay in their place? A stern, conservative lady teacher with 1950s glasses, teaching girls how to do housework? Someone like Dolores Umbridge, only less evil? Try a white female chemist, Ellen Swallow Richards, the first woman to attend MIT, who believed fervently in the power of science to free women from drudgery. "My life is to be one of active fighting," she wrote. Try a famous black woman, Margaret Murray Washington, who thought that improving the home could end racial inequality. That's all you need to know to realize that everything you thought about home economics is wrong. Home economics was far more than baking lumpy blueberry muffins, sewing throw pillows, or lugging a bag of flour around in a baby sling to learn the perils of parenting. In its purest form, home economics was about changing the world through the household. Home economists instructed and inspired waves of women who built science careers helping people live better lives. Together, they built an empire of jobs and influence. They originated the food groups, the federal poverty level, the consumer protection movement, clothing care labels, school lunch, the discipline of women's studies, and the Rice Krispies treat. They were the first to measure the economic value of housework and the amount of physical effort it took. They enabled millions of people around the world to survive harrowing deprivation. They had the ear of presidents and first ladies and queens. They helped win wars. Their work operated in as large a sphere as battlefields and on as intimate a scale as counting calories. All done with pragmatic empiricism, with an eye on careers. Home economists created tens of thousands of jobs, not just in high school classrooms, but in labs, colleges, government agencies, and business departments. For decades, there was always a job for a home economist. For decades, the profession was even respected. Through home economics, Gladys Gary Vaughn went from segregated Florida to a doctoral degree and a career that included the Civil Rights Office of the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the presidency of a major international volunteer organization. The nation has benefited. They have laughed at it, but they have benefited, she said. Home economics has been a backdoor for women to enter science, part of a surprisingly large government-backed movement, a guilt trip for women left cold by the household arts, a trapdoor or a springboard for women of color, a sometimes ironic, sometimes nostalgic preoccupation of third-wave feminists, a conservative calling card, an aesthetic obsession for the Instagram set, a feminist battlefield, and the locus for countless anxieties about women's lives. A revival seems bewilderingly overdue. The last 20 years have seen countless DIY homemaking blogs, the Food Network and Project Runway, Instagram and Pinterest, eco-friendly slow fashion, and knitted pussy hats. We live amid high-pressure parenting, financial and environmental crises, the return of vo-tech education, stress over adulting, and women still doing the lion's share of home labor. In response to a global pandemic, people stripped supermarkets of flour and big-box stores of sewing machines. Why hasn't home economics come back? Practitioners will tell you, because it never went away. Though most people think it went the way of the 8-track, home economics is, though diminished, still here. I went to the 2019 convention of the National Family and Consumer Sciences Association. That's what the field calls home ec now, and saw its members address crucial societal problems with creativity and compassion. A 50-year-old father, veteran, and prison educator presented his dissertation on how he used self-exploration to gain insights into reducing the chances of prisoners reoffending after release. A fashion student manufactured bags from an upholstery factory's leftovers. A teacher at a Native American boarding school told me about the day each year that she takes the students to fish and then to clean and cook their catch. It's a very long day. She hoped her lessons would give them an alternative to the few options in their remote communities besides fast food. A St. Louis housing inspector went back to school for home economics and thought she would change jobs after graduation, only to realize that her new studies fit perfectly into her current job. Now she brings neighborhoods together around reducing blight. And yes, an Idaho community educator talked to a full room about her Instant Pot workshops. Many people who attend get multi-cookers as presents, and then don't use them because they're scared of blowing something up, she said. That session took on extra significance when I visited my mother, and we took her new Instant Pot out of the box where it had sat since the holidays. But, you argue, we can't fix the world one person at a time. Making one's own clothes is an expensive privilege when shirts are cheap at Walmart. Cooking dinner doesn't solve health or family problems, and emphasizing the value of home cooking puts an unnecessary moral burden on people who are already struggling to raise children without enough time or support. Women are still stuck trying to do it all, while we still don't expect the same of men. You're not the first to air those arguments. Home economists have made all these points, the exact same ones, over and over again. Their foresight has been tremendous. To thumb through the home economics literature is to find our current questions debated decades or longer ago. In 1899, home economists argued for school gardens, STEM education for girls, takeout food, and affordable daycare. 40 years ago, under visionary businesswoman Satanig St. Marie, J.C. Penney's Home Economics magazine, yes, one existed, and it's fascinating, as you'll see, addressed conscious consumption, the impact of screens on children, and racist microaggressions. And yet home economics has been denigrated over and over and over again as just stitching and stirring. Sewing is actually a perfect example of the field's sophistication. Its place in home economics has been stereotyped, omnipresent, and eternally questioned. The sewing machine, patented in the U.S. in 1846, was a truly revolutionary invention. Nonetheless, Richards and Washington didn't find sewing romantic or soothing, living as they did in the time of textile factory accidents, and women taking in piecework to try to keep their families from starving. Even when home sewing appeared to be cheaper than buying, home economists reminded everyone that women's time had value. Simultaneously, they sought to protect garment workers and customers by fighting for better working conditions, non-poisonous dyes, and accurate labeling of consumer goods. Mass production, they believed, should not free some women from drudgery by exploiting others. Moreover, many home economics teachers insisted that sewing instruction should cohere with intellectual goals, should be carefully designed to lead to real careers, and exercise the brain as much as the fingers. Skill of hand may but multiply our cushions and doilies, a Massachusetts home economics teacher wrote in 1917. Power of intellect will go further. A college administrator, 40 years ago, advocated to replace sewing machines with chemistry equipment and study fibers for their endurance and thermal properties, and then study the subsequent fabrics for safety and comfort features for persons of all ages and for consumer aspects of durability. Virginia teacher Angela DeHart carried on that tradition in 2017. She got rid of her classroom sewing machines because the only jobs they prepared students for were sweatshops outside the country. Hand sewing was a different matter, however, and she did teach that. Surgeons, she said, have to sew. Yet despite decades of pushback, machine sewing has endured in home economics. Students and teachers told me that sewing taught spatial relations, geometry, and problem solving, and helped with stress relief and depression. To everyone's surprise, the coronavirus pandemic even revived its utility, as people clamored for masks. Home economists were not always paragons of modernity, and they did not all have the best motives. Sometimes they got it wrong. The group of white people that appointed itself the founders of the movement embraced Western agricultural universities, but ignored black colleges. Some got in bed with nativists and eugenicists, expressed disgust for people who ate tortillas or garlic, imposed a middle-class vision of the good life, no matter how irrelevant, and used immigrant stereotypes to mock servants. Later on, in the 1950s, they got jobs telling other women to stay home. They successfully created a professional domain for women that at first flourished, but over the long term painted women into a corner. However, for all their faults, they believed that women, that all people, should be chemists, university deans, and business leaders, and that they should be free to lead fulfilling lives. They thought that homes should foster health, intellectual development, and loving relationships, not show off the perfect set of drapes. This book does not advocate for homemaking or bring you home ec life hacks. Ellen Richards and Margaret Murray Washington did not want women to spend their lives cleaning. Richards wanted to update the home to reflect progress. What are the essentials that must be retained in a house that is a home? She asked. Was it essential to do your own cooking or wash your own windows? No. If you could afford to pay someone else to do it, great. If you enjoyed a particular chore, also great. She loved to garden. Undoubtedly, Richards would have embraced networked thermostats and smart speakers, and fought to protect us against hackers and corporate invasion of privacy. 6 months into writing this book, I remembered that my mother double majored in home economics and journalism. The year that she graduated from college, more people earned a bachelor's degree in home economics than in math. That continues to be true today. When I was a child, she had the kind of job in the General Foods marketing department that home economists used to hold. She ran consumer focus groups, wrote scripts for the Kool-Aid Man, and occasionally brought home test kitchen samples, such as the beta version of Jell-O 1-2-3. She even belonged to the professional group, Home Economists in Business. Yet I'd forgotten all about her connection to home economics, because she never talked about it. She was like many women in the 1970s and 80s who studied home ec to pursue the careers they wanted, but didn't identify as home economists. By the 1980s, majoring in home economics seemed passé and unintelligent. When I brought the topic up, she demurred. What she studied wasn't really home economics, she said. You will find many baby boomer women who hide their home economics education in the same way. However, you will also find people of all genders today studying home economics in college, and more than 3 million young people taking the class in public school. The teenagers think it's useful and fun, and don't understand why anyone would ever restrict it to girls. The college students feel passionate about their ability to create change in the world. After I told my mother the stories of Margaret Washington, Ellen Richards, and the other heroines you'll meet in this book, she changed her tune. "I was embarrassed to be a home ec major," she said. "I'm not embarrassed anymore. I invite you to join me in learning about home economics and its much too hidden history." Chapter 1. The Road to Home Economics. It's almost impossible to imagine now, but in the middle of the 1800s, school was not the central experience of children's lives. It's common knowledge that it was illegal to educate people who were enslaved. Less familiar is the fact that close to half the country's whites didn't attend school, and it wasn't until the end of the century that the majority of Americans completed 8th grade. As late as 1870, the average child who was enrolled in school went for less than 4 months a year. Many girls learned at home, either alone or in small groups called dame schools. Even education-mad Boston did not allow girls in public high school. College was for wealthy white males, with barely a handful of exceptions. Mount Holyoke and Georgia Female College, now Wesleyan College, were women only. The Institute for Colored Youth, now Cheney University, educated black men and women. Oberlin College admitted women and men, black and white. As for rights, when white and free black women married, and 9 of 10 did, legally, it was as if they had died. They lost their right to own property in their own name, sign a contract, or claim wages. All of which made Catherine Beecher, born in 1800, all the more remarkable. Beecher was marked for greatness by her father Lyman. The first words he whispered to his newborn were, "Thou little immortal." The oldest child in a family that became famous for abolitionism, education, and Calvinist piety, she grew into a sociable but fierce young woman who debated theology with her beloved father and preened her corkscrew curls. Fortuitously, Lyman received a ministry in Litchfield, Connecticut, home of one of the few secondary schools for girls. Beecher, a quick-witted but lazy student, attended school for about 6 years before leaving to care for the family after her mother died. By our standards, Beecher was religious. Even so, when her father pressed her to have a deep religious conversion experience and submit to God, else he believed she would not be saved, she resisted, deciding that she would follow Christian doctrine, but not act excessively humble herself. She refused to sing a hymn with the lyrics, "I am nothing, Lord," because she said, "I am not nothing." Despite the never-resolved doctrinal conflict, the family remained intensely loyal to each other. At 21, Beecher became engaged to a Yale science professor. Then, a tragic accident changed the course of her life. Her fiancé's ship crashed on the cliffs of Ireland. Beecher wore his engagement ring until the end of her life. Yet, in mourning, she found her way. While living with her late fiancé's family and tutoring his younger siblings, she read his scientific and mathematics books and found she enjoyed the mental exercise. She decided to use the $2,000 he had willed her to start a school in Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford Female Seminary rapidly became popular. Within 5 years, it had its own building and 8 teachers. The daughters of the city's finest citizens learned geography, grammar, algebra, geometry, philosophy, and composition. Some also took Latin, French, Italian, piano, earth science, and chemistry. Despite her success, Beecher wondered whether she was following the best educational plan for these girls. Too many women were sickly, children's moral development was sadly lacking, and schools paid no attention to the future most women would have, caring for a household. There was a time when the only object of a woman's education seemed to be to prepare her for an active, economical, and accomplished housewife. and no intellectual refinement or erudition was esteemed of any value, but rather a disadvantage. She wrote her trustees in 1829. Mankind, perhaps, are now urging to the other extreme, and in regarding the intellect are beginning to overlook the future duties and employments of domestic life. In 1832, Beecher moved to Cincinnati, where her father had a new job to open another school, the Western Female Institute. Her goal was to add moral education to the lessons and to train women to teach on the frontier. Though initially all went well, after several years the Beecher's social position collapsed. The upper crust thought she was domineering, with ill-bred curiosity and appalling manners. She devoured all before her and licked her fingers, one member of society exclaimed. She put on airs, acting like Easterners were better, and though the family were not yet the abolitionist leaders they became, any support for abolitionism was touchy, an eyelash away from a slave state. The school failed. Almost 40 years old, Beecher now had no school and no home of her own. She stayed with her siblings and former pupils, wrote and tried to publish math and moral education textbooks, and wrote fiction, though nowhere near as successfully as her sister, Harriet Beecher Stowe. She suffered from depression and headaches, and brooded over the danger she thought Catholic immigrants posed to the body politic. She also began writing a book on household education, which turned the moment of her deepest failure into her biggest success. Household guides were nothing new. Many women already read miscellanies of advice and recipes such as Lydia Maria Child's Pantry Staple, The American Frugal Housewife. But Beecher's book, A Treatise on Domestic Economy, published in 1841, was an entirely new animal. The 400-page tome brought together education, cleaning, religion, civics, gender, and morality. It wasn't just about how to care for a house. It was about the power of women to glue together a fragile society. Beecher's philosophy was unified and pragmatic. Woman's place was in the home, she wrote. That was God's plan. But that seemingly submissive position was in fact the core of democracy. The mother forms the character of the future man. The sister bends the fibers that are hereafter to be the forest tree. The wife sways the heart, whose energies may turn for good or for evil the destinies of a nation, she wrote. Educate a woman, and the interests of a whole family are secured. Her father and brother weren't the only Beechers who could preach a sermon. That education had to include not only academics, but housework. To underline the intelligence of such work, she gave housework education an intellectual-sounding name, domestic economy. And she made an argument that would create jobs for countless women. Domestic economy was too important and complex to be left to amateurs, that is, mothers. It had to be formally taught by professional educators. To be sure, after 2 decades in education, Beecher had a somewhat jaundiced view of what happens after graduation. It may be urged that even if it is studied, it will soon be forgotten, she wrote, but so will much of everything studied at school. Some people argued that educating a girl damaged her femininity. Domestic economy most emphatically did not. No one seemed to notice that while seeming to celebrate the home as sanctuary, Beecher politicized and professionalized it. The rest of the treatise synthesized an enormous amount of information. Peristalsis, pimples, calisthenics, manners, charitable giving, time management, servant management, the ways that corsets weakened the spine, and the senselessness of an educated woman doing her own sewing while paying someone else to teach her children, instead of teaching the children and farming out the sewing. The treatise included an antidote for cobalt poisoning and precise illustrations of both human and architectural circulatory systems. The Massachusetts State Education Board soon adopted it, making it the country's first officially recognized home economics textbook. It sold for 2 generations, as did add-ons Beecher wrote, such as a cookbook. Domestic economy would play a key role as schooling expanded in America, with unmarried, childless Catherine Beecher as the nation's homemaker-in-chief. A generation later, Ellen Swallow Richards and Margaret Murray Washington picked up her mantle. Ellen Swallow was the fastest reader in town. She had to be. She was trying to pull off the near impossible for a country girl in the mid-19th century, to become college-educated. Born in 1842, Nellie won first prize at the county fair at age 13 for a loaf of bread and an embroidered hanky. She also ran around the hillsides, kept her own garden, and helped her father do everything but milk the cows. Her mother drew the line there, believing it ruined the hands. Her parents, Peter and Fanny, were unusually well-educated for the time, having met at New Ipswich Academy in New Hampshire, and thought the village school wasn't good enough for their daughter. They taught her at home, at the kitchen table. Eventually, they gave up farming and moved into town so their child could attend Westford Academy, one of the oldest co-ed schools in the state, led by a future governor of Massachusetts. Peter Swallow opened a general store on the Westford town green, and his daughter walked to the school, where she made a point of registering not as Nellie, but as Ellen. Already she was beginning to have a determined mouth, a strong brow. At Westford, Swallow studied a range of scholarly subjects, including German, Greek, and logic. Simultaneously, she got a hands-on education in business. After waking up in the morning, she did household chores and restocked the store shelves. Then she read while walking across the green, attended school, came home, and staffed the cashier's table while keeping her father's accounts. Her math skills outclassed his, and occasionally sassing the customers. Always she kept a book open on the table to study in idle moments. For Ellen Swallow, there was never, nor would there ever be, an idle moment. Swallow left high school in 1862 and launched her boat into becalmed seas. More than anything, she wanted more education. But how? So few colleges accepted women, and none close enough for her to attend. Evidently, she could not travel outside the region. Mount Holyoke had a college-level curriculum, but did not award bachelor's degrees. Her father opened a larger store in a nearby town that doubled as the post office. Swallow advanced her own education by ordering lots of newsy periodicals for him to sell, and for her to read first. For an agonizing 6 years, her life remained frozen in a pattern. She went away and taught to earn money for college, sometimes living on bread and milk to save as much as possible, then bounced home to help her ailing mother. While there, she helped with the store and tutored or nursed to continue building her college fund. Her age mates began to marry, but Swallow did not. The young or old gentleman has not yet made his appearance, who can entice me away from my free and independent life, she wrote her cousin in 1866. Married women seemed to live in silent misery. To the outside world, she seemed cheerful and busy, but for the last 2 years of her purgatory, she was racked with fatigue, what we would today call depression. Thwarted and hedged in on every side, she wrote later. If I had not had an almost Napoleonic faith in my star, I should have yielded. She clung to a strange encounter on the street in Lowell, when she accidentally jostled an old lady. Swallow apologized. The woman stared at her and said, like a prophet, "And you have a great deal of work to do." At last, her effort paid off. In one of the magazines she got for the store, Godey's Ladies' Book, Swallow learned that a new college for white women was opening just over the state line in New York. Vassar.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?